Unsolved mysteries. Who doesn't love them? They are interesting, creepy, scary, and best of all, up to speculation. And yes, I know, this has been covered a lot by a few other YouTubers, but luckily for me and you, there are tons of different interesting icebergs covering unsolved mysteries, so most likely you haven't seen this one before. And this one is shorter, relatively. Has 100 or something entries or something, but I didn't count. But 100 entries is a lot, but not anything compared to the ones that have thousands of entries. But who has time for that? So if you don't want to spend 7 or more hours watching one of these icebergs, look no further, because this one is for you. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the video. And actually, before we start the video, disclaimer. This gets into some disturbing, scary, and other bad stuff, obviously. This will mainly consist of murders, so rest in peace to all the people and the families that suffer from the loss of a loved one. And I hope that the person who committed the crime is brought to justice. I'm not going to try to make it scarier than it actually is, unlike a lot of other YouTubers, but I'm just going to say what needs to be said, and I'm going to censor it when it's needed. But other than that, enjoy the video. And, oh yeah, subscribe. I'm trying to reach 10K before the end of the year, and I'd love if you could help me reach that. It's free, and anyways, let's actually get into the video now. Alright, the first tier, Tier 1. I didn't really get into how many tiers there are in this video, but there are 10 tiers in this iceberg, so let's get into it with the first entry being Jack the Ripper. In 1888, an unidentified serial killer named Jack the Ripper terrorized the impoverished Whitechapel district of London, targeting women working as prostitutes. The killer's gruesome attacks involved throat cutting and abdominal mutilations, leading to the speculation about anatomical knowledge. The name Jack the Ripper originated from a letter that may have been a hoax. Despite an extensive police investigation, the murders remain unsolved, fueling enduring public fascination and folklore to this day. The canonical 5 victims are often considered most likely linked to the killer. Ruthie Mary Terry, also known as the Lady of the Dunes, was a murder victim found on July 26, 1974, in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Her body was exhumed multiple times in attempts to identify her. In October 2022, the FBI confirmed her identity. She was discovered by a 12-year-old girl in the Race Point Dunes, lying face down on the beach blanket. The victim had auburn hair, painted toenails, and expensive dental work. Some body parts were missing, and she suffered severe head injuries, possibly from strangulation, which caused her death. There were also signs of sexual assault. The case remains unsolved, and she was buried in October 1974. In 2014, funds were raised for a new casket as the original one deteriorated. D.B. Cooper. D.B. Cooper is an unidentified man who hijacked a Boeing 727 aircraft on November 24, 1971, demanding a ransom of $200,000 in parachutes. After releasing the passengers, he parachuted into the night over Washington state and was never found. The FBI investigated for 45 years but couldn't definitely identify him. The case remains the only unsolved air piracy in commercial aviation history. The FBI speculates that he didn't survive the jump due to various factors. Despite the suspension of the official investigation in 2016, many continue to pursue theories about his identity and fate. The hijacking prompted significant changes in aviation security. The Boy in the Box. Joseph Augustus Zarelli, previously known as the Boy in the Box, Boy in a Box, or America's Unknown Child, was an American 4-year-old boy whose naked, extensively beaten dead body was found on the side of Saskatchewan Road in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. On February 25, 1957, Joseph appeared to have been cleaned and freshly groomed, with a recent haircut and trimmed fingernails. Although he had suffered extensive physical abuse prior to his death, with multiple bruises on his body, Joseph was also severely malnourished. The body was covered with scars, some of which were surgical. Authorities believed that the cause of death was homicide by blunt force trauma. Despite the publicity and sporadic interest throughout the years, the boy's identity remained unknown for over half a century. On November 30th, 2022, the Philadelphia Police Department announced that detectives had determined the boy's identity using DNA and genealogical databases. On December 8th, 2022, more than 65 years after the boy was found, the boy was publicly identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli during a press conference held by Philadelphia Police Department. Though the boy was identified, the exact circumstances leading to the death are uncertain, and the case is still considered an open homicide investigation. The Villisca Axe Murders. The Villisca Axe Murders occurred between the evening of June 9, 1912 and the early mornings of June 10, 1912, in the town of Wasilla, Iowa, United States. The 6 members of the Moore family and 2 guests were found bludgeoned in the Moore residence. All 8 victims, including 6 children, had severe head wounds from the axe. A lengthy investigation yielded several suspects, one of whom was tried twice. The first trial ended in a hung jury, and the second ended in acquittal. The crime remains unsolved. The Zodiac Killer, one of the most popular entries on this list. The Zodiac Killer is an unidentified serial killer who's operated in Northern California during the late 1960s. He murdered 5 known victims and claimed to have killed 37. The killer sent taunting letters to newspapers, including cryptograms, and targeted young couples and cab drivers. Despite numerous theories about his identity, the case remains unsolved. The San Francisco Police Department and other agencies have maintained open case files on the Zodiac murders for decades. The killer's mysterious actions and cryptic messages have captured international interest and inspired amateur detectives to seek answers. Elizabeth Short, known as the Black Delilah, was a young American woman found murdered in Los Angeles in January 1947. Her case gained significant media attention due to the gruesome nature of the crime, and her body was bisected at the waist. Though often described as an aspiring actress, she has not known acting credits during her time in Los Angeles. The nickname Black Delilah emerged from the media coverage of the case. Despite an extensive investigation with over 150 suspects, no one was arrested for her murder. The mystery surrounding her death has fascinated the public and inspired various theories and speculations over the years. Her story has been the subject of numerous books and films, and her murder remains one of the most famous unsolved cases in U.S. history. The Axeman of New Orleans. The Axeman of New Orleans has an unidentified American serial killer active in New Orleans, Louisiana, and surrounding communities, including Gretna. From May 1918 to October 1919, press reports during the height of public panic about the killings mentioned similar murders as early as 1911, but recent researchers have claimed that these reports into question. The Axeman was never identified, and the murders remain unsolved. He mainly targeted Italian immigrants and Italian Americans. This leaves the possibility open the questions were racially motivated, but as the killer was never caught, this was never conclusively proven. The murders of Biggie and Tupac. The East Coast-West Coast hip-hop rivalry was a feud between artists and fans of the East Coast and West Coast hip-hop scenes in the mid-1990s in the United States. It centered around the notorious B.I.G. and Puff Daddy from the Bad Boy Records on the East Coast, and Tupac and Suge Knight from Death Row Records on the West Coast. The feud escalated and tragically resulted in the murders of both rappers in separate drive-by shootings. Despite several suspects being identified, both murders remain unsolved. The trial of OJ Simpson, a former NFL player, broadcaster, and actor, took place in 1994 through 1995, with him being charged with the murders of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman. The trial was highly publicized and became known as the trial of the century. Simpson was acquitted with murder charges, leading to divided reactions from the public, particularly along racial lines. The defense argued that the DNA evidence was mishandled and that the case was tainted by misconduct and racism within the LAPD. After the trial, Simpson was found liable for the deaths in a civil lawsuit by the Goldman's father and has ordered to pay significant damages. He later moved to Florida to protect his personal assets from being seized to cover the liabilities. The trial remains one of the most publicized criminal cases in history. Alright, now into Tier 2, and I 100% know I'm going to mispronounce a lot of these names inside this entry specifically, and starting with the Hintergrund Murders. And they occurred on the March 31st, 1922, at a small farmstead in Bavaria, Germany. 6 inhabitants of the farm were brutally murdered with a mattock, including Andreas Gruber, his wife Kazila, their daughter Victoria, and her 2 children, Kazil and Joseph, along with the maid Maria Baumgartner. The killers remained at a farm with the bodies for 3 days before the crime was discovered. The murders have remained unsolved and though considered one of the most perplexing and gruesome unsolved crimes in German history. Before the incident, the family and the maid reported hearing strange noises from the attic, which caused the maid to leave the farm. The case continues to be a mystery to this day. The 1991 Austin yogurt shop killings is a tragic and unsolved quadruple homicide that occurred at a "I can't believe it's yogurt" shop in Austin, Texas. The victims were 4 teenage girls, including employees Jennifer Harbinson and Eliza Thomas, and customers Saria Haberson and Amy Ayers. The crime took place on December 6, 1991, when the shop was set on fire after closing. The girls were shot in the head, and some were also sexually assaulted. The investigation has faced challenges in identifying the perpetrators, but the Austin Police Department has DNA evidence from an unknown male connected to one of the R words. A Y chromosome match for this DNA has been found in FBI research databases, but the law prevents revealing the identity of the individual. The case remains unsolved, and the tragedy continues to haunt the community and investigators to this day. The Max Headroom Incident. The Max Headroom signal hijacking occurred on the night of November 22, 1987, when the television signals of 2 stations in Chicago, Illinois were hijacked, briefly sending a pirate broadcast of an unidentified person wearing a Max Headroom mask and costume to thousands of home viewers. The first incident took place during the sports segment of independent TV station WGN-TV's 9 p.m. newscast. Like that later signal intrusion, it featured a person wearing a mask swaying erratically in front of a swiveling corrugated metal panel, apparently meant to resemble Max Headroom's animated geometric background. Unlike the later intrusion, the only sound was a loud buzz. This interruption went on for almost 17 seconds before the engineers at WGN were able to regain control of their broadcast tower. The second incident occurred about 2 hours later during PBS member station WTTW's broadcast of Doctor Who serial horror of Fang Rock. While nobody on duty at the affected tower, this signal takeover was more sustained, and the masked figure could be heard making references to real Max Headroom's advertisements for New Coke, the animated TV series Clutch Cargo, WGN sportscaster Chuck Swirsky, greatest world newspaper nerds, and other seemingly unrelated topics. The video concluded when the masked figure's bare buttocks began being spanked by a woman with a fly spotter while yelling, "They're coming to get me," with the woman responding, "Bend over, bitch." As the figure was crying and screaming, at that point, the hijackers ended the pirate transmission and normal programming resumed after an intentional interruption of about 90 seconds. A criminal investigation conducted by the Federal Communications Commission in the immediate aftermath of the intrusion could not find the persons responsible, and despite many unofficial inquiries and much speculation over the ensuing decades, the culprits have yet to be positively identified. The Beaumont Children. Jane Natari Beaumont, Arden Kathleen Beaumont, and Grant Elise Beaumont, collectively referred to as the media as the Beaumont Children, were 3 Australian siblings who disappeared from Galena Beach near Adelaide, South Australia on the 26th of January 1966 in a suspected abduction and murder. Police investigations revealed that, on the day of their disappearance, several witnesses had seen the 3 children on and near Glenville Beach in the company of a tall man whose fairish to light brown hair and a thin face with a suntan complexion and a medium build, aged in his mid-30s, confirmed sightings of the children occurred at the Coley Reserve and at the Wenzel's Cake Shop on Mosley Street, Glenville. Despite numerous searches, neither the children nor the suspect companion were located. The case revealed worldwide attention as it was credited with causing a change in Australian lifestyles, since parents began to believe that their children could no longer be presumed to be safe when unsupervised in public. In recent years, police and media speculation has linked the disappearances to the deal of abductions of 1973. Interest in the case has continued for more than half a century on, as in 2018, a $1 million reward has been offered for information related to the cold case by the South Australian government. The Caddy Cabin Murders. The Caddy murders are an unsolved quadruple homicide which took place over the night of April 11th through 12th, 1981, in Caddy, California, United States. The victims were Glenna Suzanne Sue Sharp, daughter Tina Louise Sharp, son John Stephen Sharp, and John's friend, Dana Hall Wingate. The murders took place in house number 28 of the Caddy Resort. The bodies of Sue, John, and Dana were found on the mornings of April 12th by Sue's 14-year-old daughter, Sheila, who had been sleeping at a friend's house. Sue's 2 younger sons, Rick and Greg, as well as their friend Justin Smart, were also in the house but were unharmed. Tina was missing from the scene. Tina remained a missing person until April 1984, when her skull and several other bones were recovered at Camp 18, California, near Feather Falls in Butte County. Multiple leads and suspects were examined in the interviewing years, though no charges were filed. Several new leads were announced in the 21st century, including the discovery of a hammer in a pond in 2016, as well as announcements regarding the discovery of new DNA evidence, but the case remains unsolved. The Smiley Face Killer. The Smiley Face murder theory is a theory advanced by retired New York City detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, as well as Dr. Lee Gibson, a criminal justice professor and gang expert at St. Cloud State University. It alleges that 45 young men found dead bodies in water across several Midwestern American states from the late 1990s to 2010s, and they did not accidentally drown, as concluded by law enforcement agencies, but were victims of a serial killer or killers. The term smiley face became connected to the alleged murders when it was made public that the police had discovered graffiti depicting a smiley face near locations where they think the killer dumped the bodies in at least a dozen of the cases. Gannon wrote a textbook case study on the subject titled Case Studies in Drowning Forensics. The response of law enforcement investigators and other experts have been largely skeptical. The 2001 Anthrax Attacks, also known as the Amaraths, was a series of incidents in the United States that began on September 18, 2001, 1 week after the September 11th terrorist attacks. Anthrax spores were mailed to several news media offices and politicians, resulting in the deaths of 5 people and infecting 17 others. The FBI conducted an extensive investigation, initially focusing on bioweapons expert Stephen Hatfield, who was later exonerated. The investigation shifted to Bruce Edwards Ivins, a scientist at Fort Detrick in Maryland, and he became the main suspect. However, Ivins committed suicide in 2008 before formal charges were brought against him. Federal prosecutors declared him the sole perpetrator, but some doubt remains about his involvement based on scientific evidence. The FBI formally closed the investigation in 2010, but in 2011, a review by the National Academy of Sciences cast doubt on the conclusion that Ivins was the perpetrator. The report stated that while the anthrax used in the attacks were correctly identified, there are insufficient evidence to conclusively link it to Ivins' laboratory. Some information about the case and Ivins' mental health remains sealed. The government settled lawsuits filed by the window of the first anthrax victim for $2.5 million without admitting liability. The case remains a complex and continuous chapter in American history. Alright, now into Tier 3 with the Annecy Shootings. The Annecy Shootings, also known as the French Alps Shootings or the Chavin Killings, occurred on September 5, 2012, near Chavin, Haute-Sauvie, France. The tragic incident involved the deaths of 3 members of a British family and a French citizen on the route France Dumont de la Comédie, close to the southern end of Lake Annecy. And I know I've already apologized multiple times in this video already, but please, I'm sorry for my pronunciation on these French words and any other words that I might not know, so give me a break. But the victims of the shootings were Saeed Al-Hili, a 50-year-old Iraqi-born British tourist, his wife Aqil, aged 47, and her mother Swahili Al-Alaf, 74, who held a Swedish passport. Additionally, French cyclist Savion Molière, who was 45 years old, was also killed in the attack. Notably, the Al-Hili's 2 daughters were present during the shootings but managed to survive. One of the daughters, just 4 years old at the time, was found hidden under the deceased mother's legs in the rear footwell of the car for 8 hours before specialist forensic investigators discovered her. The elder daughter, aged 7, was shot in the shoulder and sustained a head wound, but eventually returned to the United Kingdom after the incident. The motive and the identity of the perpetrators behind the Annecy shootings remain a mystery to the day. Despite an extensive investigation, French police stated in September 2017 that they had no working theory to explain the murders and no suspects. Speculation arose, but no definitive answers have emerged. One of the theories suggests that the family might have been targeted randomly. This tragic case continues to puzzle authorities and the public alike. The murder of Amber Hagerman. In the blink of an eye, the life of 9-year-old Amber Hagerman changed forever. On that fateful day, Amber left her grandmother's home in Texas to ride her bike, never knowing it would be her last moments of innocence. Within 8 minutes of her departure, she was abducted. The search for her was intense, but it was 4 days later when her body was discovered in a creek bed just a few miles away. Amber's throat had been cut, and her killer managed to evade capture, leaving behind a grieving family and a community shattered by a senseless act of violence. Despite efforts to solve the case, no arrests have been made, and Amber's murderer remains at large. The Darden Family Murders. On November 18, 1987, a devastating crime was uncovered in Illinois. Police arrived at a mobile home of Russell Keith Darden, whose age was 29, and his family to find the bodies of his wife and son brutally beaten. Even more horrifying was the discovery that Ruby Ellen Darden, who had been pregnant with the couple's daughter, had been beaten so severely that she went into labor, and the killer, or killers, took the life of the newborn as well. The crime was committed the day before, making it all more shocking. Investigators initially suspected Keith as the prime suspect, but the next day his body was found in a nearby field. He had been shot and his genitals mutilated. His car was found near the police station in Benton. Forensic examination revealed that he had been killed within an hour of his family. Residents of Jefferson and Franklin counties were already on edge due to a series of more than 10 murders that had occurred locally in the previous 2 years. The discovery of the Darden family's bodies only heightened their fear. However, despite an extensive investigation, authorities could not determine a motive or identify any suspects. The case remains unsolved, leaving the community haunted by this unspeakable act of violence with no closure in sight. Mr. Cruel. Mr. Cruel is a chilling name given to an unidentified suspect involved in a series of child R-word and the murder of Carmine Chan in Melbourne during the late 1980s and the early 1990s. The name originated from a headline in the Melbourne newspaper, The Sun, emphasizing the public's fear and anxiety surrounding these horrific crimes. Mr. Cruel proved to be an intelligent and meticulous perpetrator, planning each attack with precision. He conducted surveillance on his victims and their families, leaving no forensic traces behind. To protect his identity, he always covered his face and employed red herrings to mislead investigators. During one attack, he even took a break in a victim's house to eat a meal, displaying a calm and unhurried demeanor. He threatened his victims and their families with a knife or a handgun, instilling a reign of terror in their community. Despite a reward of $200,000 for information leading to his arrest and conviction, and an increase of reward to $1 million in 2016, Mr. Cruel remains at large, eluding capture and leaving behind a trail of unsolved and deeply troubling cold cases. The Las Cruces Bowling Alley Massacre. On February 10, 1990, a horrifying and brutal massacre unfolded at the Las Cruces Bowling Alley in Las Cruces, New Mexico, United States. 2 unidentified robbers entered the establishment and carried out a heinous act of violence that claimed the lives of 7 people. During the attack, 4 individuals lost their lives, succumbing to the gunman's deadly shots. The perpetrators targeted the victims in an office within the bowling alley, where they mercilessly shot them before setting fire to a desk and leaving the scene. The incident sent shockwaves through the community and left authorities scrambling to apprehend the culprits. Despite thorough investigations, the case remains unsolved to this day. The Cleveland Torso Killer. In the 1930s, the city of Cleveland, Ohio became the haunting ground for a serial killer known as the Cleveland Torso Murderer, or the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. This unidentified perpetrator carried out a chilling string of killings that involved the dismemberment of 13 known victims. The killings were particularly gruesome, with the murderer disposing of the victims' remains in the impoverished neighborhood of Kingsbury Run. Most of the victims hailed from the area known as the Roaring Third, or Hobo Jungle, characterized by bars, gambling dens, brothels, and vagrants. Lawman Elliot Ness, who served as Cleveland's public safety director, led the investigation into the murderers, but despite his efforts, the killer eluded capture. The community lived in fear, and the mystery surrounding the identity of the Cleveland Torso Killer remains one of the city's most notorious and chilling unsolved cases. The West Mesa murders shook Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the nation when the remains of 11 women were discovered buried in the desert on the West Mesa in 2009. The victims' families were devastated, and law enforcement faced the daunting task of finding the person or persons responsible for these heinous crimes. While several suspects have been named, no one has been arrested or charged in connections with these murders. Initially believed to be the work of a serial killer, the case took a disturbing turn as the involvement of a sex trafficking ring became under suspicion. An anonymous tip to authorities pointed to a suspect from Central America, raising questions about the potential ties between the killings and a larger network of human trafficking. The investigation has led authorities to consider the involvement of sex trafficking operations across multiple states, including Texas, Colorado, and Nevada, with the intention of preying upon vulnerable individuals, especially during major events that attract large crowds. Despite Despite efforts to uncover the truth, the West Mesa murders case remains unsolved, leaving the victims' families and the community yearning for justice and closure. Tier 4. The Eastbound Strangler. The Eastbound Strangler remains an enigmatic and unidentified serial killer believed to have terrorized Atlantic City, New Jersey in 2006. This ruthless perpetrator is suspected to be responsible for the murders of 4 women, all identified as prostitutes, whose bodies were discovered in a drainage ditch filled with shallow water behind the Golden Key Motel on the Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township near Atlantic City. The chilling discovery of the 4 victims took place on November 20th, 2006. The bodies of the women were placed face down in a row, all facing east, and faced approximately 60 feet apart from each other. The killers had removed their shoes and socks before taking their lives in a horrific manner, believed to be through strangulation. Despite intense efforts by law enforcement, the case remains unsolved, leaving the families of the victims devastated and the community haunted by the uncertainty of the perpetrator's identity. A $25,000 reward offered for information leading to the apprehension of the Eastbound Strangler remains unclaimed, adding to the frustration and urgency in solving these crimes. The Highway of Tears. The Highway of Tears is a 447-mile corridor in British Columbia, Canada, where numerous Indigenous women have gone missing or been murdered since 1970. Poverty, drug abuse, and other factors contribute to the high number of victims. The cases remain largely unsolved. The Monster with 21 Faces. The Monster with 21 Faces, also referred to as Cajun Nuja Menso, which I totally just mispronounced, earned its name as an alias used by a group responsible for blackmail letters during the Glico Morange case in Japan in 1984. The enigmatic and exclusive group unleashed a series of threats and extortion attempts that sent shockwaves throughout the nation. At approximately 9 p.m. on March 18, 1994, 2 masked men, armed with what later appeared to be toy guns, broke into the home of Azaki Glico president. Katsushi Azaki used a stolen key from the adjacent property. They took Kazuto Azaki hostage and subjected her family to a harrowing ordeal, tying up his wife and children while demanding money. The group's reign of terror extended beyond their initial break-in, as they set fire to several vehicles at the company's headquarters and placed a plastic container filled with hydrochloric acid inside of a Glico company building. In the wake of these events, the nation was gripped by fear and uncertainty. Despite investigations and various conjectures, the true identity of the Monster with 21 Faces remains a mystery, leaving an unsettling legacy of unsolved crimes and unanswered questions. 1979 Sydney Ghost Train Fire. On June 9, 1979, a devastating fire engulfed the ghost train ride at Luna Park, Sydney and Millicent Point, New South Wales, Australia, resulting in the tragic deaths of 7 people, including 6 children and 1 adult. This horrifying incident of mass murder and armed robbery unfolded due to inadequate firefighting measures and low staffing at the amusement park. Initially, the fire was attributed to the electrical faults, but speculation about arson involving known figures also surfaced. However, the exact cause of fire could not be determined through a coroner inquiry. The tragedy led to the temporary closure of Luna Park until 1982, when it reopened under new ownership and a new name. Throughout the years, efforts were made to honor the victims and remember the lives lost, including the installation of a memorial garden and plaque listing those who perished. The investigation into the 1979 Sydney Ghost Train fire has faced numerous challenges, and the lack of definitive findings have left lingering questions and emotional scars for the victims' families and the broader community. The Lane Bryant Shooting. The Lane Bryant shooting occurred on February 2, 2008 at Lane Bryant Clothing Outlet in the Brookside Marketplace in Tinley Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. During this tragic incident, 5 people were killed and a 6th individual was injured. The assailant, who carried out the armed robbery and mass murder, remains unidentified to this day. Following the shooting, law enforcement authorities launched an intensive investigation to apprehend the perpetrator. On February 11, 2008, the police released a sketch of the suspect, hoping to garner information from the public. This move led to the reception of around 24 leads within the first 24 hours, but unfortunately, the case still remains unsolved. The Sherman Murders. Bernard Charles Barry Sherman was a prominent Canadian businessman and philanthropist who served as the chairman and CEO of Apotex Inc., a major pharmaceutical company. At the time of his death, on December 13, 2017, his estimated net worth was around $3.2 billion, making him one of Canada's wealthiest individuals. Sherman's journey into the pharmaceutical industry began in the 1960s when he took over the operations of the Empire Laboratories, a drug company founded by his late uncle, Louis Lloyd Winter. With dedication and business acumen, Sherman eventually founded Optex, which became highly successful. However, his aggressive nature and elitist approach to competition and regulatory issues often garnered attention. In 1971, Barney Sherman married his wife Honey, who later gained prominence in Canadian philanthropy, actively participated on the boards of several notable charities. Their partnership was known for their dedication to charitable causes and community development. Tragically, the couple was found dead in their home in 2017. Initially, the Toronto Police Service considered the deaths a murder suicide, a conclusion that sparked widespread debate and skepticism in the media. Despite the controversy surrounding the initial assessment, the investigation continued, and in 2019, the police claimed to have a working theory of the case and some understanding of what might have happened. As of May 2022, the investigation remains active and ongoing, with the mystery in the Sherman murders still unsolved. Alright, halfway through the icebergs with Tier 5, and I don't even know if I'm doing with my life anymore, but the first thing is the Mad Pooper. The Mad Pooper, a bizarre nickname, was given to an unidentified woman in Colorado Springs, Colorado during the summer of 2017. This woman gained notoriety for repeatedly defecating in public while jogging. Though her primary target seemed to be a specific family's property, she also left her excrement at other nearby sites. Despite photographs of her being made public, no one, including the woman herself or anyone knew her, came forward to identify her. Law enforcement authorities believed that her actions were intentional, as there were several public toilets available within a block of the family's house, which she could have used. Amidst national media attention, a YouTube video purporting to be from a spokesperson claimed that her behavior was linked to recent medical issues and was protected under the First Amendment, but it was turned out to be a hoax. As a bizarre twist, Procter & Gamble offered her a free year supply of Sherman brand toilet paper if she turned herself in. While the case garnered significant attention in mid-September, the woman's public defecations seemingly stopped, and there has been no further reports of her engaging in such behavior. The mystery of the Mad Pooper's true identity and her motives remains unsolved, with speculations ranging from medical issues to expeditional tendencies taking revenge on the family who confronted her. Phantom social workers. The term phantom social workers emerged in the United Kingdom and the United States in the early 1990s, following sporadic reports to police and media about individuals claiming to be the social workers attempting to abduct children from their parents. Despite investigations by law enforcement, no substantial evidence was found, and no suspects were located. The phenomenon sparked concerns and fears in the community, but no concrete evidence of such actions could be established. Over the years, reports of the phantom social workers have been sporadic and unsubstantiated, leaving many to wonder if there was genuine threat or a series of unfounded rumors. As time passed, reports of phantom social workers waned, and the term faded from public discourse. However, the mystery of these alleged imposters remains unresolved, and the fear and anxiety they once caused have left an enduring impact on the collective consciousness. The Geezer Bandit. The Geezer Bandit earned its name from the FBI from a series of bank robberies he committed in Southern California, operating in the San Diego area. This man was accused of robbing at least 16 banks between August 2009 and December 2011. The most intriguing aspect of his identity was his appearance, which seemed to be that of a man in his mid to late 70s. However, some law enforcement officials speculated that he might not be an elderly man at all. There was a theory suggesting he was a master of disguise, possibly using a silicone mask to create the illusion of advanced age. The string of robberies and the Geezer Bandit's ability to evade capture sparked interest in realistic theatrical disguises. The Geezer Bandit's most recent robbery occurred in December 2011, and despite extensive efforts by law enforcement, he managed to elude capture. Surveillance footage of his latest robbery led some to question whether its elderly appearance was a disguise, as he appeared to run abnormally fast for someone of his alleged age after a dye pack exploded in the stolen money bag. Despite the speculation and the media attention, the identity of the Geezer Bandit remains a mystery, and the memory of his cunning robberies lingers in the minds of those who pursued him unsuccessfully. Alright, now on to Tier 6, starting with the Broadband Killers. The Broadband Killers, also known as the Magel Gang in Dutch-speaking media and the Mad Killers of Brabant in French-speaking media, are responsible for a series of violent attacks that occurred mainly in the Belgian province of Brabant between 1982 and 1985. During this crime spree, a total of 28 people tragically lost their lives, and 22 others were injured, making it one of Belgium's most notorious and haunting unsolved cases. The gang is believed to consist of a core group of 3 men, each with specific roles: the Giant, a tall man suspected to be the leader, the Killer, the main shooter, and the Old Man, a middle-aged man who acted as the driver. Despite significant resources dedicated to the case, the identities and the whereabouts of the Broadband Killers remain unknown. In a surprising twist, the most recent arrests related to the case involved the original senior detectives, now retired, who were accused of alleged evidence tampering. The gang abruptly stopped their violent activities in 1985, leaving an investigation that struggled to make any substantial progress in solving the crimes. This led to a parliamentary inquiry and the public discussions that revolved around intriguing theories. Some speculated that the gang members might have also connected to either Belgian or foreign state security elements, potentially carrying out covert missions disguised as targeted assassinations or political terrorism. The Franciscan Priest Murders. The 1980s Franciscan Priest Murders refer to a perplexing series of disappearances and murders involving 2 Catholic priests in the western United States between 1982 and 1984. On August 5, 1982, Father Reynaldo Rivera, OFM, a priest at the Cathedral Basilica of St. Francis in Santa Fe, New Mexico, was murdered in an unknown location, and his body was tragically found 3 days later. Approximately a year and a half later, on July 20th, 1984, Father John Kerrigan, a diocesan priest in the Diocese of Helena and assigned to the Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Ronan, Montana, disappeared after leaving a bakery. Several days after Kerrigan's disappearance, bloodied articles of clothing were discovered along Montana Highway 35, along with a blood-stained coat hanger. 7 days later, Kerrigan's vehicle was found in Polson, Montana, with his wallet containing $1,200 left in the trunk, along with a bloody shovel and a pillowcase. Despite extensive efforts, Kerrigan's remains were never recovered. While no definitive connection between Rivera and Kerrigan have ever been discovered, the murders of both priests have been linked due to some shared circumstances and parallels at their respective crime scenes. In 1988, the cases were profiled together on the NBC series Unsolved Mysteries. In 2015, the Diocese of Helena published a list of clergy and staff implicated in sexual abuse of minors, and Kerrigan was included to the extensive list, adding further intrigue to the mystery surrounding these unfortunate deaths. The Alphabet Murders. The Alphabet Murders, also known as the Double Initial Murders, are an unsolved series of chilling child murders that occurred between 1971 and 1973 in Rochester, New York. During this harrowing period, 3 young girls aged 10 or 11, each with their first name that started with the same letter as their surname, lost their lives tragically. In all 3 cases, the victims were sexually assaulted and brutally murdered, while with their bodies abandoned near towns or villages with names sharing the same letter as the victims' names. The investigation into these heinous crimes have been relentless, but no suspect has been conclusively identified, leaving families and investigators searching for answers for decades. The haunting pattern of the victims' names and the brutality of the crimes have perplexed law enforcement and captured the attention of the public. The Alphabet Murders remain one of the Rochester's most enduring and haunting mysteries, with many hoping for closure and justice for the innocent victims and their grieving families. The Bible Belt Strangler. The Redhead Murders, referred to as the media affidavit, are a series of unsolved homicides of red-headed females in the United States that occurred between October 1978 and 1992. Believed to be committed by an unidentified male serial killer, these horrifying murders have spanned across states including Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. The victims were young women with reddish hair, and their bodies were found abandoned along major highways, indicating a possible connection to hitchhiking or involvement in sex work. The exact number of victims remain uncertain, with estimates ranging from 5 to 14. As of November 2018, 4 presumed victims have been identified. The suspect, informally labeled as the Bible Belt Strangler in 2018 due to the geographical region of the murders, remains elusive, leaving authorities unsure on how many perpetrators may be responsible for these heart-wrenching crimes. The Redhead Murders continue to haunt the communities around the area. 2006 Sacramento County deaths. In 2006, Sacramento County Sheriff's Deputy Sheriff Mitchell was killed during a traffic stop, leading to a violent struggle. Investigators later found a white van connected to the incident with 2 bodies inside, raising questions about a possible connection between the killings and Deputy Mitchell's death. The case remains unsolved. Alright, now into Tier 7, the abduction of Violet Ripkin. Violet Ripkin was abducted from her home in Aberdeen, Maryland, and returned unharmed after approximately 23 hours. The motive behind the abduction remained unclear, as the kidnapper seemed unaware of Violet's identity as the wife of a famous baseball player. Surveillance footage and images of the suspect were released, but no ransom demand was ever made. The investigation involved local police and the FBI, with no definitive leads to the case. The Zip Gum Bomber. Joan Betty Dallas, a high school guidance counselor from Brooklyn, New York, was tragically killed on May 7, 1982, when she opened a package that turned out to be a bomb. The investigation into her murder did not yield any concrete leads or suspects, and the case eventually went cold. Over a decade later, similar bombings occurred, raising suspicions of a connection. However, it wasn't until 1995 that a potential breakthrough occurred when Stephanie Gaffini, a young woman from Queens, discovered a suspicious package addressed to Gilmore or occupant. The investigation into these bombings, attributed to the Zip Gun Bomber, remained unsolved, with no definitive suspects identified. The Jack Family. On August 1, 1989, Ronnie Jack and his family received a job offer at a logging camp near Prince George, British Columbia. They left with a man who offered to drive them to the site, but never returned. The family was reported missing and remains unaccounted for. The prime suspect is a Caucasian man described as 6 to 6'6" feet tall, with a reddish-brown hair as a red, full beard. Despite extensive investigations, their fate and the suspect's identity remain unknown. Alright, now on to Tier 8, and these tiers are getting a lot shorter because there's not as much information, and a lot of these were solved and stuff like that, so each of these final tiers won't have that many, but they're definitely more interesting, I'd say. And starting it off with the Storyville Slayer. The Storyville Slayer is a nickname given to the American serial killer who murdered at least 24 prostitutes and drug addicts, most of whom were women, in New Orleans, Louisiana. Through the course of the investigation, 2 separate suspects were considered, one of whom was convicted of one murder, leading investigators to believe that multiple killers are responsible. The Florence Salon Murders. In November 2001, a customer arrived at the Hair Gallery Salon in Florence, Montana. She saw an oddly dressed man leaving the salon. Later, she discovered the body of the salon owner, Dorothy Harris, and called 911. 2 more bodies were found in the salon. The small town in Florence, with a population of less than 1,000, was shocked by the brutal triple murder. The investigation struggled to find a motive or suspect. Eyewitnesses describe an oddly dressed man as the person of interest, but his identity remains unknown. The FBI assisted in creating a profile, but no arrests were made. The case received media attention and changed the perception of safety in the town. A similar double murder occurred in Great Bend, Kansas in September 2002, with no clear motive or suspect. The Shaw Creek Killer. On November 16, 1987, hunters found skeletal remains near Shaw Creek, South Carolina. The body was posed and had been there for 1 to 5 years. Several bones were missing and cocaine was found in the hair. The victim's identity remained unknown for over 30 years. 3 more bodies were found in the area, possibly victims of the same killer. One victim was identified as Jacqueline Marie Council in 1999 through forensic analysis and DNA testing, but no other things have been found at this case. Septic Tank Sam. Gordon Gordy Edwin Sanderson, formerly known as Septic Tank Sam, was a previously unidentified murder victim found in a septic tank in 1977 at Lynbrook, Alberta, Canada. In January 2021, his remains were identified and his true identity was revealed 5 months later. The investigation into his homicide is still ongoing. Sanderson's body showed signs of torture before his death, including beatings, burn marks, and sexual mutilation with a sharp object. He had survived 2 fatal gunshots to the head and chest, and quicklime was used to cover his body. Despite extensive efforts, his murderers remain unknown, and it is suspected that they were likely known to him, possibly from the Totefield area. Efforts to identify Sanderson involved facial reconstruction twice and sending x-rays of his teeth to 800 dentists in Alberta. However, his identity remained a mystery for decades, leading to numerous speculations about the motive behind his brutal murder. Police now believe that Sanderson was killed by associates involved in criminal activities in Edmonton. While they continue their investigation, they acknowledge that his killers may no longer be alive. The Burrowing Burglars. In 1986, a group of burglars executed an elaborate bank heist in Hollywood, California. They tunneled into the bank vault system from a nearby store and drainage system, stealing over $150,000 in cash and valuable items from security deposit boxes. Despite their meticulous planning and near success, they remained unidentified. A year later, they attempted another robbery, but they were forced to flee. The burglars had created tunnels to access the bank vaults, displaying remarkable engineering skills. Police investigated, but the case eventually went cold. The burglars, known as the Burrowing Burglars, came close to achieving the crime of the century, but retired from their criminal careers after these incidents. The case remains unsolved. Tier 9. The Serial Castration Murders. The castration serial murders were a series of murders of young men committed in between 2 and at least 5 American states between August 1980 and November 1986. All the victims were kidnapped, shot in the back of the head, and castrated post-mortem, from which the case got its namesake. They were initially considered unrelated due to the crime scene's geometric remoteness until 1989, when forensic evidence concluded that 2 of the victims had been killed with the same revolver, with the 3 likely being related as well. The Night Watcher Robberies. One of the creepiest names on this list. Robert and Catherine Stiff, a wealthy couple living in Surrey, were targeted by a masked man who broke into their house. The intruder demanded jewelry and access to the family's safe, using a sawed-off shotgun to intimidate them. He violently assaulted Catherine and her pregnant daughter before leaving the valuable items in a black duffel bag. The masked man remained at large, and similar robberies were linked to him. Investigators believed he had the military training and targeted affluent families after careful planning and reconnaissance. The Night Watcher, as he became known, carried out a series of crimes between 2014 and 2017, causing fear and concern. The case remains unsolved, but the arrest of another burglar, the Wimbledon Prowler, provided some relief, although the connection between the 2 criminals remains uncertain. And now onto the final tier of the iceberg, Tier 10. And if you're still watching, thank you for watching, because it means a ton, and subscribe and like if you haven't already, since you're already this far into the video. But now, the final tier of the iceberg, or the final first entry, is the murder of Tristan Burbach. Tristan Burbach was a 13-year-old German boy who was murdered in the Frankfurt suburb of Host. His murder remains unsolved. Burbach was last seen alive at Bruno Acht Angla, a park in front of the Frankfurt Host railway station at 3:20 p.m. on the day of his murder. His body was discovered by children walking home from school. They returned to the school to tell their teachers, and the police were informed at 5:08 p.m. Burbach's body was in the pedestrian tunnel that runs alongside an underground section of the Lurbach River. The tunnel is known locally as the Lurbach Tunnel, and I know I'm mispronouncing all of these German words wrong, but please don't get mad at me. I get enough comments already about mispronunciation, but I don't have the time to look up every single one. And Burbach had been beaten unconscious and strangled. The cause of death was a long slash across his neck. Both testicles, as well as his flesh from his buttocks and thighs, had been removed. The murder weapon lay on a concrete block nearby. The murder has been seen from a distance by 3 teenagers, and they did not realize at the time what they were witnessing. These witnesses gave the police a description of the suspect, and a composite sketch was produced. In March 1999, a year after the murder, Tristan Burbach was found in a forest in Nerzerhausen, 25 kilometers from the crime scene. The rucksack contained a Czech language road atlas of Germany, which is believed not to have belonged to Burbach, who did not speak Czech and had no reason or means to possess such an item. The police consecutively expanded their inquiries to the Czech Republic and Slovakia, but no viable leads emerged. A large-scale fingerprinting operation began in 2002. All males between 15 and 45 from Host and Otterbach, as well as most commuters in the age bracket who used Frankfurt Host railway station at the time by the murder, have been invited to submit fingerprint samples voluntarily. By 2014, 98.65% of 15 to 45 40-year-old males from Hashav, and 92% of those from Udavak have done so. And I just totally butchered every single one of those German words so badly. And I know some of my viewer base is from Germany, so please forgive me. And yeah, on to the next one. The Tromanov beheadings. The Tromanov beheadings was a mass murder committed in 2012 in Ukraine, in which a judge and his family were beheaded with a machete. The judge, Vladimir Tromanov, his wife Irina, their son Sergei, and their son's girlfriend were attacked in the eastern Ukraine city of Kharkov on December 15, 2012. The judge was attacked at his family home. The bodies were all left at the scene, minus their heads. It was reported the judge, his wife, and the son's girlfriend were killed first, then beheaded, while the son was beheaded while still alive. Police stated that this motive for the murders were either revenge or theft. Tromadov, who was aged 58, had worked as a magistrate and the judge for more than 30 years, and was noted and tweets collector. The attack came on Celebration Day for judges in Ukraine. The case was described as one of the most shocking to emerge from the new European state in the international media, with many commentators using the case to spotlight the flawed Ukrainian judicial system. The Italian Unabomber is a name referring to an unidentified terrorist who carried out a series of bombings in the Veneto region of Italy between 1994 and 2006. The Italian Unabomber placed small booby-trapped objects in public places in Veneto and Friuli Venezia Giulia. And I know I just mispronounced those Italian names, but please don't attack me in the comments, which were designed to detonate when handled by a passerby and seriously injure but not kill the victim. The Italian Unabomber was named by the international press in a reference to Ted Kaczynski, the American neo-terrorist, and a male bomber known as the Unabomber, but the Italian bomber made no political or economic demands. Over 30 explosive devices were attributed to the Italian Unabomber and resulted in numerous people receiving injuries, including the removal of digits and limbs. On August 28, 2006, Italian police raided the house of Elvo Zorinta, a 49-year-old engineer who had been placed under surveillance for a year with assistance from the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation in January 2009. After years of investigations, the case was dropped after the prosecutors asked for its dismissal for lack of evidence. Zorinta received £300,000 as compensation for his arrest and trial, which included false evidence. To this day, the Italian Unabomber remains unidentified. In October 2022, at the request of a journalist and a victim, the case was reopened by the local prosecutor's office thanks to the discovery of DNA and blood traces that once could be analyzed due to the lack of suitable technologies. The Father's Day Bank Massacre is a tragic event that occurred on Sunday, June 16, 1991, at the United Bank Tower in Denver, Colorado. On that fateful day, a bank robbery turned into a violent shooting that left 4 unarmed bank guards dead and sent shockwaves throughout the community. At approximately 4 a.m. on Father's Day, an alarm was triggered in a basement storage room at the United Bank Tower. However, records revealed that the guard room in the control center ignored the alarm and took no further action. It remains unclear whether this incident was somehow connected to the upcoming robbery. Around 9:14 a.m., a man claiming to be Robert Bardwell, a vice president at the bank, requested entry into the bank through a side freight elevator. He used his street-level security phone to contact the bank's guard room. Guard William McCullum Jr. responded and rode the elevator up from the guard room. Tragically, as the elevator doors opened, the gunman forced McCullum to ride the subsequent area of the bank, where he ultimately killed him and took his electric pass card. The perpetrator continued his sinister journey throughout the bank tunnels and made his way up to the basement level area, where the vault and guard station were located. During this time, an alarm was triggered at 9:20 a.m. when he entered a stairwell, but it seemingly had a little effect on his actions. Inside the vault area, the intruder confronted 2 guards, Philip Manikoff and Scott McCarthy, and forced them into a battery room, where he fatally shot both men. It was believed that a third guard, Todd Wilson, may have returned to the area during or immediately after the shooting and was also killed by the gunman. In total, the assailant fired 18 shots throughout the killing spree, hitting all his victims except one. None of the 4 murdered bank guards were armed, which made them vulnerable to a merciless attack. Before leaving the guardroom and entering the vault area, the intruder carefully tampered with evidence to erase any traces of his identity. He took 10 videotapes, bank keys, a two-way radio, and pages from the guard logbook, leaving behind little to identify him. After gaining access to the vault at 9:48 a.m., the intruder encountered 6 vault employees processing cash deliveries. He ordered them to cover their eyes and lie on the floor while he demanded the senior vault manager, David Barranco, to fill a satchel with cash from the workstations. The assailant then forced the tellers into a small room near the vault, known as a man trap, before making his escape at 9:56 a.m., leaving them locked inside. Using a broken spoon they found on the man trap's door sill, the tellers managed to free themselves approximately 20 minutes after the robbery. Before leaving the scene, the robber meticulously collected all the spent shells casings that had been removed from his revolver after firing it. The only physical evidence he left behind was the 18 bullets he had fired. Despite extensive investigations and a nationally broadcast trial on court TV, authorities arrested retired police officer James W. King as a suspect on July 4, 1991. However, the jury later acquitted him after days of deliberation, and none of the money was ever recovered. To this day, the Father's Day Bank Massacre remains an unsolved cold case, haunting the memories of the victim's family and the community at large. The elusive identity of the perpetrator, who appeared to be in his late 50s or 60s and was described as wearing a gray sport coat, a white shirt, a multicolored necktie, blue or gray slacks, brown fedora hat, mirrored sunglasses, and a bandage on his left cheek, continues to puzzle investigators and law enforcement alike. The events on that tragic day have left a lasting impact on the United Bank Tower, leading to changes in the bank's security policies and forever making June 16, 1991 a somber day in Denver's history. And alright, that wraps it up for the Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. I hope you enjoyed, and stay safe out there. There's a lot of murderers still out there. Anyways, subscribe and like the video and comment video ideas below. And thank you for watching. And until next time, see ya.